I'm back with another author chat today. And I'm really thankful that you are joining us either live or watching this video later. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by an author whose work I've wanted to read for a long time. And thanks to the folks over at Booksparks and MCD, which is the imprint that he publishes with, I was given an opportunity. They reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to read his book and have a chat with your book club? Now, my book club, I have to warn you, these ladies are wonderful and we've been friends for decades, but they do not want to go live on the internet. So what we did is we've discussed the book and they've given me their questions so that I can make sure they all get asked. And they are watching, or hopefully they will be later on. They just are shy about the internet, and that's okay. This, it's not for everybody. They're not real big on social media, but they are very, very astute readers, and I think we have some great questions. So without any further ado, who are we going to speak with? We're going to speak with Chris Pavone, whose fantastic novel, The Doorman, is now out in paperback, and this book came out last year, and it was on my list of books to get to. So Booksparks must be pretty smart and maybe psychic, because when they reached out to me, I went, yes, yes, yes. This book has gotten so many accolades, and they are all deserved. I will tell you that. Bags under my eyes from finishing the book 2 nights ago. I mean, it's just amazing. I could not put it down, and I've never seen a better example of a book where the setting is absolutely critical to the story, and it just couldn't be set anywhere else. And we'll get into that with him. Let's see if he's here. There we go. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm glad you made it. Instagram and their little glitches sometimes,
Yeah, it was a little bit torturous there. How are you?
I apologize.
Not
I'm
your
great,
fault.
and I'm really happy to be here with you. I have to start off by telling you, couldn't put it down.
Thank you.
I loved it. And I'm so thankful that the folks at Booksparks reached out to me and set this up for us, because I've been wanting to read this book, and they gave me that little nudge that I needed, right? Because it was on my list, I guarantee you. And now it's out in paperback, so it's more accessible if anybody's been waiting to read it. It's readily available now in a little less expensive edition, I'm assuming, since it's paperback. Since there's some astute commentary in here about many things. I swear, did you major in sociology?
No, I didn't. Thank you for asking that.
You could have fooled me, I swear. Now, first of all, let's go back and let me introduce you to the folks that are joining us. Chris is a New Yorker. Grew up in Brooklyn. That's one place I haven't been, so you're going to have to tell us a little bit about that. Went to school at Midwood High School, and Cornell, which is up in Ithaca, right? That's a very, very fine institution. I know that. What did you major in at Cornell?
Government.
Government. Interesting. But then you went into publishing.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked in book publishing for nearly 2 decades.
Right.
And then my wife got a job in Luxembourg, and we moved abroad with our 4-year-old twins and our dog, and she began her life working abroad, and I began my life at home raising small children.
And how was that for you?
That was very hard.
Yeah.
Being home with little kids is, I think, hard for everybody. And I felt like I had some additional challenges in that I really didn't speak the language very well, and I'd never lived anywhere except New York, and my whole support system and all of my friends and family and everything I knew was New York, and I was many thousand miles away in a culture that I didn't really understand, without any friends, and with this new lack of career of, instead of going to work every day, I took care of little kids, and I went to the supermarket, and I cooked and I cleaned and I meted out discipline, and I tried to figure out how to do all the things you need to try to figure out when you move someplace new, including, for the first time in my life, really making a whole new set of friends. And
Wow.
that's a very hard thing to do, and I don't think it gets easier as you get older. I was 40 years old when we moved to Luxembourg, and that experience led me to write my first novel, 𝐂𝐴𝐸𝐸, which I started writing when we were in Luxembourg. We decided to move back to New York after the Luxembourg adventure was clearly going to come to an end. And looking at where we would go next, we decided to come back to New York. And I continued working on the book here and sold it, published it in 2012. And this is what I've been doing since then.
Well, I was just going to ask you, that must have been the inspiration for a book titled The Expats.
Yes, absolutely. And there are parts of the book that were very much based on my life, but the first version that I was writing of that book was very boring and very tedious and was all about the tedium of moving abroad and having small children. And it was basically me whining for 400 pages. And I realized that nobody wanted to read that type of book. So I set out to figure out how I could use what I had, what I was living through, and turn it into something more interesting, more exciting, less whiny, a more credible story about expat life.
So let's go back to your childhood. Were you always a reader as a kid? Now, there's some questions I have to warn you. I have to ask certain questions because if I don't, I always hear from people, why didn't you ask that? So there's, dedicated readers want to know certain things. One of them is about authors and if they've always been readers.
Yes.
So you were at the library, you had your nose in a book as a kid?
All the time, yeah.
Okay. Any favorites from childhood that stand out in your memories?
My favorite books that I remember were the E.B. White books. They were Charlotte's
Ah,
Web and Stuart Little. And later,
yeah.
I think the best book on English style is White and Strunk's Elements of Style, which I started
Mhm.
using when I was in high school. And it was also a Cornell book, and it was very important to my life as my first jobs in publishing. I was a copy editor, and copy editors, their job is all about style. And I don't mean style as in the author's individual panache. I mean style in terms of, is there a serial comma used, and are the numbers spelled out correctly, and how do you form a possessive and things like that. And so
Right.
much of what some people do in publishing, and I was one of those people, is make sure that those things are consistent within a book and that everything is clear and that the facts are facts and the quotes are real quotes and things like that.
I had a copy of that book on my desk for my entire career for legal writing, but still, you have to get the details right. You do not want to embarrass yourself with the judge, right?
That's right. It's an important thing to do.
Right. Because if you want to make a good impression, have a typo and find out how well that goes.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So, but you majored in government. And was there an area that you had in mind when you went to college that you wanted to pursue?
No.
No, just
I
that
went
was
to
something that interested you?
I graduated from high school when I was 16 years old. I graduated from college when I was 20. I have no idea how people that young with so little experience of the world are expected to figure out what it is that they want to do with the rest of their lives. I certainly didn't do a good job of it. I know people, there's some careers, being a medical doctor, where you basically have to decide when you're 15 years old if that's the thing you want to do. And
Hmm.
the only people who really know what it's like to be a doctor at that age are people whose parents are doctors.
Hmm.
Everybody else knows about it from television.
Right.
And that's no way to choose a career. And I honestly don't understand for the life of me what I was thinking when I was in college and I decided that I wanted to be a writer. I don't remember what it is that I knew at that moment about what this life was or what this job consisted of. I'm a little bit afraid that mostly what I wanted to be a writer for was to prove to the world how smart I was. And luckily, I didn't get around to writing for another couple of decades, at which point I already knew that I was not that smart and that good writing is not about proving to the world how smart you are. So I sat out that horrible period of my 20s when I could have written some really awful books. And instead, I had a really satisfying career working in publishing.
How did you make your way from college into publishing? Was it a straight shot or did you do other things first?
I didn't really do anything first, except I was briefly a substitute teacher. But I made my way into publishing via small jobs that I didn't want, but that they were necessary feet through the door. And they were not in interesting parts of publishing for me. They were just things that I needed to do for a couple of years in order to then get my first job in a real book publishing house, which is Doubleday in the early 1990s.
Okay. And certainly that's a great place to start. Doubleday is still a huge, huge publisher in the industry and has some very big authors. So you went to one of the best places. I'm assuming that you could learn a lot.
I learned so much at Doubleday back then, and it was a really terrific place to work. And it was a different era when publishers spent more money, had more money, made more money. It was more fun, and there were more parties. It was more glamorous. The editor at the end of my hallway was Jackie Onassis. And in those years, I worked on not books 1 and 2, but 3, 4, 5, 6 of John Grisham's early legal thrillers. I worked on Pat Conroy novel, Beach Music, and got to know him pretty well. I worked on a lot of great books and a lot of books that sold really well, and even some books that were both. I also worked on cookbooks, which Doubleday published at the time, and that led to my specialty for a while when I was older was publishing cookbooks. I got a lot of exposure to a lot of different types of books and a lot of different types of editors and how the business worked as a business, how the money worked, and it was a fantastic job, and it was also the place where I met my wife. So it was
Oh.
many benefits accrued from
Oh,
working at
yeah.
Doubleday. Yeah.
Well, and not to mention all that knowledge so that when you started writing, you knew how the business worked and what steps you needed to take to become a published author, which a lot of people, like I would have no clue. I could sit here and pound out a novel, but I wouldn't have the first idea how to start, you know? So
Yeah.
that's invaluable knowledge. And obviously you had, people that you knew. That explains one of the blurbs on your book, John Grisham.
Sort of, yeah. I actually never met him at the time. I didn't end up meeting John until maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something like
Oh,
that. So well after my Doubleday years.
I
I was no
see.
longer an editor when I met him.
I see. Okay. And you went up to the top. You
Well,
were
I
with
wouldn't say
some,
that. Yeah.
well, you
I
were with some
was
magazines and you were like managing editor and
No, I
correct?
never worked at any magazines. I was a managing editor of a publishing house, yeah, which is not the person in book publishing. The managing editor is not a person in charge. That's at a magazine. In book
Oh,
publishing,
I
the
see. Okay.
managing editor sort of manages the workflow. I was a senior editor. I was an executive editor. The highest I got in an organization was I was an associate publisher at a large independent publishing house called Workman, and I was running the day-to-day affairs of one of the imprints. And that was a job that was really about personnel and money and commerce and process. And I did not like that job, and I was not good at it. And that turned out to be the last job I had in an office before I quit and started writing.
I
And
see.
that was 20
Okay.
years ago. I left that job 19 years ago.
All right. So for people who are curious about the industry, and that's another thing that, readers always want to hear about. From the time that you left and began writing to now, how have you seen the industry change? What things are different in your opinion?
Oh my God, everything.
Yeah.
um, One of the most alarming things is that authors make less money now. And they
Mm-hmm.
make less money because books have not kept pace with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
When I started working in publishing in the early 1990s, a new John Grisham hardcover legal thriller cost $23.
Mm-hmm.
If that had kept pace with inflation, a new version of that book today would cost more than $50, but it costs 30. And the gap there is a very real gap of actual income for authors. Authors, if you sell the same number of books today as you did 30 years ago, you make half the amount of money. And for some authors, that doesn't matter. For most authors, it does. For most
Yeah.
authors, that's a difference between being able to do this as a full-time job, which it is, or
Mm-hmm.
not, and needing
Right.
to supplement your income in tons of other ways. And a large part of the reason for that is the downward pressure that's been exerted by really online booksellers, and one in particular where there are a lot of books that are free. There are a lot of books that are 99 cents. There are a lot of subscription plans where if you, as a reader, pay a certain amount of money every month, you then expect all of your books to be free. And that free comes from something, and that something is from me. And that's how Amazon has chosen to acquire customers, which is to offer books as loss leaders and to say to all of America, to all of the world, here are essentially free books if you sign up for this thing where we're going to sell you groceries and everything else. This is the thing you're going to get. The books are going to be cheap. And you can log on to Amazon right now and read any type of book you want to read for basically nothing. And that didn't exist 30, 35 years ago. And the gap between what books are going for right now and what authors need to earn a living is immense, and it's growing. And this is really not the case in a lot of countries, where in most places, retailers are simply not allowed to sell books for whatever price they want. They're allowed to sell books for the retail price that the publisher has chosen. And those price protections are in place exactly for this reason, to protect authors being able to make a living.
I'm always, well, not as surprised anymore, but you know, when I first got on social media, and one good thing about social media is what we're doing, that people who live in a town like where I live, authors don't tour. And so for me to go out and meet an author really becomes an event and a trip somewhere most of the time, because they don't even come, you know, within a couple of hours most of the time. So that's one of the good things. But one of the other things that I was surprised about initially is how many authors whose work I was reading had full-time jobs during the day that were not writing. And they would tell stories, you know, on events like this or Zooms with other authors, or, you know, all the different things that we do online about getting up at 4 in the morning and writing for 3 hours before they could go to your office, and then working and I'm like, I'd be exhausted. How do you do that? I mean, that's amazing to me, but that's what it takes for them to be able to pursue what they love. And so that was a real eye-opener for me, and certainly inspired me to try to buy more books. I know a lot of authors are very enthusiastic about libraries, because I know that also still helps them, because the libraries do have to purchase the books. Is that correct?
Yeah, libraries need to purchase the books, and but libraries are obviously important. Libraries are a big part of every reader's life. I think you grow up going to libraries, and there are a lot of people who can't afford to buy as many full-price books as they want to. Books, even if they're not as expensive as they were 35 years ago, are definitely an expensive thing to do. But they're a lot cheaper than going to the movies. They're a lot cheaper than going to dinner. They're a fraction of the price that people spend on their phone service plans and on their Prime memberships and on everything else that people spend every month. A lot of people spend hundreds or sometimes $1,000 a month these days on telecommunications. And once they've spent all that money on their streaming services and their phone plan and their data and their roaming and their internet service provider, they then think that because they've spent all that money and given all that money to the cable providers of the world and to the streamers of the world, that everything else should be free. And what I think is hard to understand is that the content creators on the other end of it, whether they're actors or musicians or novelists like me, may not be making almost any money from that. So the world has not gotten cheaper for readers, for consumers. The world has gotten much more expensive. I mean, I also, when I started working in publishing, I didn't have cable television, and my telephone bill was $18 a month. That was the entirety of what I spent on telecom. And now it's more like $400 a month, $500 a month that I spend on these things. That is immense. But most of that money is going to giant corporations, not to individual authors. And those
I'm adding in my head what I spend every month, and I'm not going to tell you.
And you probably don't even know. I mean, so many people are subscribed to so many services that it's easy to lose track of and don't even know when the renewals happen or what the monthly bill is. I think it's basically everybody who doesn't know how much they spend a month on these services. It's a lot of money.
Now that I'm thinking about, because I was an accountant, so I can add. I may have to reevaluate this when we're done. But anyway, that's really interesting. And so as a kid, I was always in the library, and I'm sure you probably were too. So I'm always ready to plug a library and plug an independent bookstore, which, by the way, we just got a cute new one here in town that we're going to frequent. So that's all very helpful information. So let's go back to your writing. When you decided to sit down and write, you had already been editing. You were already very knowledgeable about the process. So for your own style, this is the other question I always have to ask. Are you a pantser or are you a plotter?
I plot out my books pretty deliberately. And even more important than plotting out, do you know what flap copy is on a book? This is here.
Oh, on the edge of a hardback? Yeah.
That
Okay. I didn't know that was the term for it, so I just learned something.
that's that's 300 words, maybe a little bit
Mhm.
more,
Right.
that essentially make some type of case for what the hell this book is, why it
Yep.
should exist in the world, why you want to read it, what is
Hmm.
good about it, who is the protagonist, what is the plot setup, what's the overall arc of the thing, what are we aiming at, if there's an antagonist that's important, what is important about that person, are there minor characters who are critical to understanding the whole book, who are they, what are the major tensions, what are the major themes. There's a lot to describe a book, and I make the effort to make that description before I write the book, so that I know that the thing I'm writing is a thing that I can describe, is a thing that I can go out and sell to the world, is a thing that my publisher could go out and sell to the world. So much of a book's life is dependent on this one page. And at the end of writing a book, if you've spent 2, 3, 10 years writing a book, is a very bad time to discover that you don't know how to describe it. And if you don't know how to describe it, it's going to be very hard for the book to make its way in the world.
Hmm.
So I
That's
do it at the
really
beginning.
that's really interesting. Um, how long does it typically take you to write a book?
Uh, I publish every 2 or 3 years. So I guess it takes me 2 or 3 years to write a book, but it's hard to say because it's not linear. I interrupt myself for long periods. I'm always in the middle of writing a book when I publish a book, and so I pause the writing to do the publishing, which is
Hmm.
sort of a full-time job for a few months. So, but uh, nevertheless, the average holds that it's been something like 2.5 years on average between books of mine.
And we talked about it briefly, but this is something that didn't used to happen either. Like when you were back in the publishing world initially, certainly getting on Instagram, there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook. And this takes up a lot of an author's time.
It does, yes. Um, the process of publishing a book has further and further shifted every year to being the responsibility of an author.
Mhm.
And when I started in publishing, the promotion for most authors consisted of going on book tour for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sometimes a little bit more. For most people, it was 1 or 2 weeks. And that was it. That was what you did. You left
Mhm.
home with a suitcase. You went out, you came home for a weekend, you went out again, you came home, and that was it. There was nothing else to do. There was no Huffington Post to submit essays to. There was no Instagram. There were no book clubs that you could visit in a reasonable way. There was no social media that you could engage with on a day-to-day basis. All of the things that we do now are opportunities, but they're also obligations. And
Right.
a lot of the effort has shifted away from the publishers to the authors. And the publishers still spend a lot of time and a lot of money, but I wouldn't say they require authors to do it. It's just the business requires us to do it. And to be fair, almost none of it is stuff that I don't want to do. I love talking to you about my books. I love talking about my books. I love going out and meeting readers. I love going to book festivals. I like writing. I like for people to read my writing, even when it's not books. These are all things that I enjoy doing. But you're right, they take a lot of time. And they
Yeah.
take a lot of time in a way that can very much look like volunteer work. Most
Mhm.
authors get paid by their publisher an amount of money that they will never earn back in royalties. So whether we sell 10,000 copies or 20,000 copies, we are going to earn the same amount of money. In between selling 10,000 and 20,000 copies, though, is 4 months worth of work that is essentially not paid. And again, work. Work is not a fair way to describe what's going on right now. This does not feel like work to me. What it is, though, it's the middle of a work day, and what I'm doing right now is talking to you instead of writing a book. So in that case, sense, all time spent away from doing the thing that looks like the thing I'm supposed to be doing, which is
Mhm.
writing, is work time, and it's doing something else.
Right.
But it's necessary. And that's another way that a big way that publishing has evolved in the past quarter century, that authors have a lot more to do now and get paid a lot less for it.
Well, I appreciate you being with me. And so on that
Thank you.
note, let's talk
That's
about
not
the
what I was
book.
driving at. Yeah. I was
No,
not
I do.
fishing for things. Yeah.
Anytime an author agrees to speak with me, I'm thrilled because as someone who just reads constantly, and now that I'm retired even more, I'm just always delighted to get a chance to interact. So let's talk about the Doorman, which I could not put down. So they sent me a lovely bookmark that I barely used with my book because it was open and I was like this. So first of all, let's talk about who it's dedicated to. And for people who have not been to New York, now I will tell you my disclaimer, I've been there probably, I don't know, a dozen times. And I've actually been to a building that had a doorman because I had a dear friend who lived on 72nd Street right across from the Dakota. So I had the opportunity. Now, a lot of people go to New York and visit, and they never interact with doormen because they're staying in hotels, they're tourists, they're going to Broadway shows, right? So it's a world that if you live in a place like I live, I mean, there's no building here for miles and miles I know that would have a doorman. Tell people what a doorman means to somebody who lives in New York, or can mean to somebody who lives in that kind of building in New York, and why the gentleman that you dedicated this book to was so special to you.
There are thousands and thousands of doormen in New York City, and there have been for as long as there have been apartment buildings. And one of the doorman's jobs is to be at the front door to what is an unlocked door that the public could otherwise walk into and prevent strangers from coming into the building. Um, that is the most baseline part of the job.
Right.
A large part of, and then there are other things attendant with it. The doormen tend to hold open the door for people. They tend to greet people. Um, some doormen are happy to hail taxi cabs or carry heavy bags or help you navigate out of your car. There are all sorts of things that doormen can do, but the main thing that they do is just be a human being at the front of your building, who people who live in the building see every day and talk to every day. And for a lot of people, especially people as they get older and live alone, the doormen in their building are some of the most important and main relationships they have in their lives. And that job of just being a human being who talks to people every day, that is essentially the real job of being a doorman, of just being there to talk about the weather, to talk about the Yankees or the Mets or the godforsaken Jets, or, whatever you talk about small talk wise. And when
Right.
we first moved into this building, I spent a lot of time talking to the guy who worked the door during the daytime on weekdays. His name was Johnny, and he had the perfect personality for this. He had a type of warmth that you could feel from across the street. He was always happy to talk to not just the residents of the building, but the neighborhood people and little kids and dogs and tourists and anybody. He was just ready to be out there on the sidewalk, engaging with strangers all day, every day. And I spent a lot of time with him making small talk, talking about sports, talking about his softball team that he played and managed on, and my little league team that I coached. And we grew up just a few miles from each other, just a couple of years apart in the same city of the 1970s and 80s, New York, which is a very different place than it is now. And we had a lot of small talk to talk about. And then Johnny got sick and he left for, I think it was 9 months. And he spent most of that time in the hospital. And then he spent some time recovering at home. And then he returned to work. And for the next year and a half, he continued to hold the door and to hail cabs and to carry bags while also definitely dying. And at the end of his shift one day, another doorman asked him how he was feeling. And he said, "I'm so tired, man." And he went home and he died. And he had plenty of time to figure out what he wanted his memorial service to be. And the thing that he chose it to be was, first of all, 2.5 blocks from our building here. He chose to have it where he worked instead of where he lived, so that the people he worked for could more easily come than the people he lived with. He grew up and lived his whole life in Spanish Harlem, but he also worked his whole life in this building. He started doing this job when he was 20, and he died doing it when he was 57. It's the only thing he ever did, and he was buried in his full doorman uniform, complete
Oh,
with a cap on, and the only non-regulation item was he had a New York Mets pin on his necktie. I was in the middle of writing this book when Johnny died. He did not know that I was writing a book about Doorman. He did not know it was going to be dedicated to him. He did not know that one of the characters was going to be based on his personality. And that personality of the doorman in the book, Chicky Diaz, is very much based on Johnny. The events, the action, the story of the guy's life is not.
right.
There's nothing real life that I've transferred to these pages, or no real characters. But Johnny was very much the inspiration for that character. And also our relationship was an inspiration for me to write a thriller, a story that I think from the very first sentence, this is a thriller. Somebody is going to die. But it's
Yes.
also a book about a lot of other things. It's a book about race and racism and class and money and ambition and class tensions. And all these things that I wanted to incorporate into the book, I got from my life and from my relationship with Johnny and from living in a building like the one I live in, which is a very interesting atmosphere. And I know that most people in America, most people in the world have no idea
Mm-mm.
what a doorman is, what these buildings are like, what it's like to live in them. And I didn't set out specifically to explain this world. I don't try to do that very often. I just want to drop people into a story and explain what you need to know when you need to know it, and hope that you are interested in the environment. I did that about my first book with expats in Luxembourg, and I've done that for all my books. It's just, here you are, you're in a world that you don't know. And one of the worlds you don't know is living in a building like this and interacting with doormen. So maybe that's not something that a ton of people want to learn about, but I hope that that if you do, you're interested in it.
Well, I think most readers want to hear about places they've never been, places they've never lived. I mean, why else would we read, right? We want to know things that we didn't know before we picked up that book. And like I said, I just had a little tiny bit of exposure to it. But first of all, you do pull people right into, I mean, the beginning of the book is like, oh, well, I can't go to bed now. There's something going to happen here, right? And Chicky, I have to tell you, he broke my heart a couple of times. He's such a delightful man. He was so dedicated to his family, and no spoilers in this chat because we want people to go out and read the book. But he's so broken at the beginning of this book when we find him. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he's lost someone he loved. He still has family that he needs to care for, and he's in a world of hurt. And one aspect of it jumped out at me because you do have, reading is political. We all know that. And you do have a lot of social commentary. And that's why I said, did you major in sociology? Because you must watch people with an eye that most of us were not graced with, because you really zone in not just on your main characters, but your observations about people and their behavior and their conversations are searing and fascinating, so that there's no question when you get to the end of your book that you know these people intimately, and you also know the people they interact with, even the minor characters. I'm like, well, I know that one. And sometimes I was just laughing out loud because when you were talking about the one lady that comes up with all the catchphrases, and I was like, oh, I know one of those, right? So we can always find people in here that we know as well. But Chicky in particular, you just start out from the, and I really appreciated the way you did this, because your characters are Chicky, who works at the door of the building. So all of your chapters about Chicky are front door. And then some of your chapters are apartment 2A, was it? And then 11C and D, which is where the main folks live in this building. And that's the other thing that's interesting. In addition to having a doorman, this idea of living in these high-rise buildings. And as you explained, the higher you go, the more they cost. So you got a guy that's on the second floor, and he ain't looking at Central Park. He's looking at the side street, right? And his apartment's a mere, wasn't it like $1.5 million? And then you have the folks up on the top floor on 11. And at one point, the lady who lives there says, "There's no one above us." Excuse me, but no. And they're at like 32, was it 32 million for their
I don't
apartment?
remember. Something like that. Yeah, it's a lot of
Yeah.
money.
And for most people like me, I'm going, $32 million. And, to me, that sounds like I should go buy the countryside of Northern California, and instead you're in an apartment that's probably how many square feet would you say some of these are? They're small, right?
Well, no, they're not small. I mean, nobody is paying $32 million for a small apartment. They're apartments. And it's the thing is here in New York, there are, I mean, I guess it's everywhere, but in New York, people who have what is essentially an unlimited amount of money
Right.
spend that money sometimes on apartments of insane value. And if you think that $32 million sound insane, I think I also point out in this book that there's an apartment in New York City owned
Yes.
by a hedge fund guy that cost just shy of $250 million that he
Yes.
does not live in. It's a pied a terre. And he just bought a different apartment in a different neighborhood for an insane amount of money. And to some extent, if you have whatever it is, 50, $100 billion, then $250 million is something that you earn back on a good day in the stock market. It's not a meaningful amount of money for you. And the extraordinary wealth has really skewed the way New York is priced. And one of the effects of it is that because there are so many people with so much money and so many people from all over the world are choosing to invest this money or park this money in ludicrously priced New York City real estate, it increases the price for everybody else. And it makes it
Right.
harder and harder for anybody to live here. And so, unfortunately, New York City is no longer really a place where young people come to make music and to make art and to write and to act and to be musicians and to be creative. People mostly come to New York now to make money. And if you want to do those other things, if you can possibly do them somewhere else, you do them somewhere else. For stage actors and for certain types of musicians, you really have no choice but to
Right.
come to New York and struggle and live the story of rent. But
Yeah.
for other people, the place to go now is Berlin or Los Angeles or Mexico
Mhm.
City or places where there's no such thing as a $250 million apartment that nobody lives in. And so that was something that I wanted to examine also in this book.
Well, when I said small, I should qualify that relatively compared to, some of the sprawling places that we see out here. I know the big one up there is probably what, 5,000, 6,000 square feet, right? But the lower ones, they're probably, my friend's apartment, he had two apartments in that building, and I think they were like 900 square feet, and one was maybe 1,200 square feet. And they were worth millions of dollars then when he sold them. So,
Yeah,
relatively speaking.
yeah.
All right, so let's go back to and let me ask you another question that I'll get in trouble for if I don't ask. When you were writing the book, is it a linear process because you have it all outlined? So do you go from one chapter to the next? Or do you write like everything that's going to be front door, everything that's apartment 2, apartment 11, and then merge them somehow? Which do you do?
I write linear, but I also toggle back and forth from the front of the book to the middle to the beginning and back over and over and over again. I do a lot of rewriting while I'm writing, and then I spend more time editing than I do with the first draft. So when I type the end for the first time, I know that I am not even halfway done with having the final manuscript.
So I was going to say, since you were an editor, what's your self-editing process? Is it time after time after time go through the book before you send it off to your own? Because I'm assuming you still have an editor yourself, right?
Yeah, I have a few people who edit for my manuscripts for me. I do a lot of editing, and a lot of it is about deleting things that
Hmm.
I realize are not necessary, and sometimes those things are just one word. Sometimes they're a whole plot element. Sometimes they're a character. I try to be very rigorous about getting rid of things, and not because I want my books to be short. I don't write short books. This is not a short book. I
No.
don't actually. I don't. I'm not interested in having a book be short, qua short. And some of my favorite books, most of my favorite books, are long. I like long books. What I don't like are flabby books. I don't like books that say the same thing twice when once will do. I don't
Mm-hmm.
like repeated vocabulary. I don't like anything that doesn't move forward. And moving forward doesn't necessarily mean plot. It means atmosphere. It means character, or sometimes just beautiful phrases. But I feel like as a reader, I want to be provided with some value every single sentence. And as an author, I feel that obligation too, that whatever it is that's on the page needs to be serving a purpose. And if I can't figure out what that purpose is, then I get rid of it. And that's hard work.
Mm-hmm. And time consuming.
Yes. And I do
Painstaking.
it over and over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I haven't written a novel, but I've written enough legal briefs to tell you that I would get up at 3 a.m. and go, wait, and go back to that certain page, and it would talk to me in my sleep. So,
Yeah.
so let's talk about your other characters. So we've got 𝐂𝐡𝐫𝐤, and he doesn't live in this building. He
No.
lives in another building and comes to work here, which you mentioned in the back of in your author's note, there are about 30,000 folks like 𝐂𝐡𝐫 in New York City. And it's a profession. It's a unionized, solid job, solid gig. It's a career for a lot of these folks.
Yes.
And then in the building, you have another couple, Emily and her husband, who live up on the 11th floor, who are uber wealthy. They have more money than they'll ever have to worry about and could never spend. And they're having a few problems in their marriage. And there was one thing that I found very fascinating that you said, that Emily, when she met him and they were getting married, they never talked about politics. And they never stopped to analyze how each other saw the world. And that has now come home, as the old saying goes, to roost in their marriage, because she's finding things out about her husband and his business that she's not comfortable with. And he is just clearly a snob. He's an elitist. He's racist. You know, he's all those things, and she's not comfortable with any of that. Plus, there was one point in their marriage when they had different ideas about the number of children they should have that made me almost throw the book across the room when I found out what her husband had said to her. And I'm not going to spoil that for anybody else, but this guy's just really a piece of work. And that's a very, very contemporary storyline, because this is happening in the world with a lot of people. I have friends who have, shared with me that they don't talk to their spouse about what they see on the news. They don't talk about who they're voting for, because we're such a divided nation right now. And so that really rang true for me. Then you have another couple. You have Julian, who's an art dealer with a partner. And his wife is really the breadwinner at this point, and his business is in trouble. And now all these folks are going to find their lives entwined more than just living in the building, and off we go. Now there's mystery here, and there's an awful lot of intrigue, but there's also so much heart in this book. Tell me, do you have a favorite character aside from 𝐂𝐡𝐫? I know he's probably close to your heart. Was there another one that you just had the most fun? Because there's times that the fun is dripping off of this page. I have to tell you, I read a sentence and go back and go, I bet he really had fun writing that sentence. Who was it that really you enjoyed writing more than 𝐂𝐡𝐫, or, differently than 𝐂𝐡𝐫?
That's very hard to say. I enjoyed writing all the characters in this book. I enjoyed writing the people I don't like. And that's one of the great joys, I think, of being a novelist, is to be able to paint portraits of people or things that you don't like and criticize them there on the page in a way that you don't get to do in real life. You don't get to do that. You don't get to go up to somebody at a party and tell them, you're a racist. But I sort of do, and I get to do that on the page, and it's a very satisfying thing to do. I get to work out a lot of things I don't like about the world by writing these characters who I don't like. And I really enjoy the process of writing characters I don't like. But I also really enjoy finding everybody's humanity. And I have to say that even though I don't like wit who's the villain you're talking about,
Right.
Emily's husband. I don't like another character, another couple of characters in the book. I don't feel like I approach them without trying to see their humanity.
Mhm.
And sometimes their humanity is a little harder to find than others, but I still try to have it be there. I don't really like villains that much in general. Most of my books don't have what you would call a villain. They have
Mhm.
people in conflict, and hopefully they're credible people, and hopefully it's credible conflict, but it's not because one is evil and one is not. And in this book, certainly Wit is morally compromised in a lot of ways. I don't actually think that he's evil. I think that he has lost his way. I think he's angry about a lot of things. I think I dislike him. I think you dislike him. I think most
Oh
people
yeah.
dislike him. But I
Oh
don't
yeah.
think he sees himself as a villain. And I feel like that's true of the other characters too, to whom I've turned a negative eye. They probably don't see themselves as villains. I don't
Mhm.
believe anybody sees themselves as villains. And it's in the eye of the beholder who the villain is in every situation.
Well, I saw Wit as someone who grew up with so much wealth, so much privilege. He doesn't understand life any other way. So he doesn't
Yes.
understand why anybody would want to see life in any other way because he doesn't have to worry, unlike Chicky, and I hope this is okay and it's not a big spoiler, who has medical debt to deal with, which that really resonated with me having lost a spouse last year and seeing how much the medical bills were and going, God for insurance because I wouldn't be sitting in my house right now. I'd probably be selling it to try to pay off debt, which is a whole other issue we could talk hours about. But, you know, Chicky is struggling with that and a few other things, just trying to survive, literally trying to survive. And here's this
Yeah.
guy, this $1 zillion apartment who can't possibly spend his money looking down his nose at these people, which I'm sure you encounter those folks where you live. We certainly encounter them where we all live, right? They are everywhere, basically. Um, and Emily broke my heart a few times, and Julian definitely broke my heart a few times. I mean, these characters, they're all human beings. They're all flawed human beings, which I think is what makes them so fascinating because it's no fun to read about somebody that's just got their life all together. Well, that was a boring book. I mean, what was the point, right? And so the way that you converge their lives, I think, is very, very skillful. And you drop little hints along the way for folks who haven't read the book that you just sit down and don't plan to go anywhere because, you know, when you leave us at the end of a chapter with some of these sentences, like, you know, foreshadowing, well, of course, I'm not stopping now. So pour another glass of wine and, you know, just stay in your comfy chair because you're going to be there. And that's, I mean, that's just skillful writing. That's just plain and simple. And I want to hold this up again so people see this. Um, did they break your heart as you were writing the story too? I mean, like, did you know that some of these things had to occur? They were going to be wrenching both for the reader and maybe for you?
Yeah. Um, I think one of the main jobs of a novelist is to make readers feel. And one of, I think, the goals is to manipulate readers into feeling something without readers being aware that manipulation is what's happening. And in the process of manipulating readers, I'm also manipulating myself. And I'm constructing scenarios and characters and relationships in conflict or in love with the idea that I want eventually readers to feel something about these characters. And my goal at the end of every novel is for readers to feel something very strongly. And I write suspense fiction. And so one of the things that I want people to feel is anxiety and suspense about what is going to happen, what is going to happen. I want you to be feeling that from the very beginning. But with this book in particular, I also want you to feel, as you use the word heartbreak and love, and there's love in this book. There's a lot of
Yes.
love in this book, and
Yeah.
there's a very big love story that's at the heart of
Mm-hmm.
this book and at the
Mm-hmm.
heart of the ending of the book. And after all the action is over, after everybody who's going to die has died, after everybody who's going to prevail has prevailed, what I want you to walk away with is feeling deeply something about these characters and about what just happened.
Yeah. And I definitely did it. And this is the kind of book, you know, I don't normally read books twice because, first of all, I don't have time. I mean, that's just a small section of the books in this house. Um, but this, if I were going to sit down and read a book, this would be a book I would read again because your prose is not, well, it's not only crisp and it's not only, David Baldacci said the same thing in an interview I watched with him that you said, not an extra word. I don't want any surplusage. I don't want anything to be repetitive, but it's such a tight narrative in that manner, so well crafted. But your thoughts about these characters that you expressed and about New York and about this environment, which is, let's face it, I mean, it's just a unique setting. This story, you could carry out this intrigue and this thriller in a different setting, but you would have to change so much about the book because where it occurs is just so integral, and the whole societal structure that we could talk, that's what, you know, we could go back to the sociology angle of it. The different neighborhoods, the different areas of New York, that's something I think that if you haven't visited, maybe wouldn't jump out to people as much. But it is a series of neighborhoods, and they're all very distinct. Even to this day, they're very distinct. And people live in one part of town or the other, and there's almost like an invisible border. Is that, would you just, am I describing this properly? That you can tell when you switch from one to the other, when you cross over, so to speak. Does that, do I have that right?
Yeah, you do. And the book is very specifically set in New York City, but it's also, I feel like I set out to do this fairly deliberately, to write a book like Bonfire of the Vanities was, like a lot of New York novels are, that are really books about America right now. And New York is very useful in that way because so many of the most important issues that define life for Americans are things that we confront in New York every day by necessity because we are all thrown together all the time. There are no gated communities. Every time you step outside, even if you step outside your $250 million apartment, you don't step outside into your waiting Rolls Royce. You step outside onto a sidewalk that is filled with the diversity of humanity, and that
Yes.
all the things about America that are good and bad, and all the tensions, all the racial tensions and religious and sexual tensions, the political tensions, everything about America that we confront is confronted every day in New York City just by being here. And that's one of the things that I wanted this book to do. I wanted this book to be about the most important things we're confronting in America right now. And a lot of that is political in a way that's also extremely personal. That politics is not, it's not just a matter of voting every 4 years. Politics is something that we're all engaged with in some way every single day. And maybe that politics is simply how we treat people of different classes, or how we treat people of different religions, or how we go about our business in the world, making money or giving away money or earning money or trying to help other people earn money. All of that is something that I consider to be a part of politics. And that's one of the things that I wanted to be in the background always in this book. Every character is defined by their relationship to this political moment. That suffuses every chapter of this book. And I hope that I know I'm not hitting you over the head with it, because that's the background. In the foreground, it's a book about people and their
Right.
relationships and their conflicts. But in the background is everybody is defined by their relationship to money in this
Right.
book.
Right. And in America, it's very true, especially today when we're all struggling to put gas in the car and pay the rent or whatever is happening. You know, it's a tough time right now. But the writing, I just can't emphasize enough. The writing is beautiful. It's tight.
Thank you.
It's crisp. It moves along. The book never slows down. There's never a point at which you go, "Ugh, well, can we get to it already?" That doesn't happen. It just zip zap. So I really, this is a 5-star read. And I really cannot recommend it highly enough. And I definitely will be reading more of your work. I hope that you'll come back and chat with me next time you have a book coming out. And that reminds me, we're going to run out of time here soon. One of the things that everybody always wants me to ask is, what are you reading? do you have 2 or 3 books that you can recommend to anybody watching this to go out and read that have just really enthralled you recently?
I'll give you one. It's called Lost Lambs by Madeline Cash. I read this book a few months ago. It's a first novel. It is absolutely not a thriller. It is a very rare thing, which is an extremely funny novel. And I feel like it's funny from the very first page and funny throughout. And I think this is the hardest thing to do in writing, full stop, is be funny on the page. There's so many ways to go wrong, and 2 in a row bad jokes and it's over. And this is not a book that's filled with jokes. There are no jokes in the book. It's not a jokey book. It's just a humorous book. It's a witty book. It's a book that I enjoyed immensely.
Definitely. I'm going to check that out then, Lost Lambs, because every once in a while it's nice to have something a little bit lighter, especially, when you turn off whichever news channel you're watching. It's like, I'm just going to
Yeah,
escape for a while, and we need that, right?
we sure do. Yeah.
Chris, this has just been delightful. I really enjoy speaking with you. First of all, I've learned a lot. And I feel like if I kept talking to you for 2 or 3 more hours, I'd learn a lot more. That's the joy of being able to reach across the country and speak with someone who's had a completely different life experience than I've had, and different career, different locations. It's just so nice to hear from you and hear what went into this book and your process. I do, like I said, I want everyone to go out and get this book, get it from a independent bookstore in your town, get it from your library, whatever means you can. It will keep you up at night. It is absolutely enthralling as far as I'm concerned. And you're going to really find yourself thinking about these characters and about their lives, about what they're experiencing and how that's going to relate to your own life. And that's the best recommendation I can give, is that if you can find a book that you can walk away from and you still keep thinking about it. And that's what happens with this one. So I really appreciate you joining me today, and I appreciate you giving me so much of your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been delightful. And like I said, I hope we can do it again.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll be back soon with another author chat. Bye-bye.